Okay. Welcome everyone to this web conversation sponsored by Evolve, Groundbreaking Jewish Conversations, which is a project of reconstructing Judaism. I'm Rabbi Jacob Staub, the director of Evolve, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to this conversation with Rabbi Bob Gluck about his Evolve essay, primarily Animal Intelligence Looking Beyond Chosenness and Speciesism for the Sake of the Planet. A few preliminaries. Um, as real-time participants, which you are, I'm sure you can tell, you are invited to join the conversation by posting comments and questions in the chat. We'll try to get to them as quickly as we can and to get as many as we can responded to, but the only advice I have is do not wait politely until the end of the conversation to post them, because you should interrupt. You should put the chat in and we'll get to them when we can. Second, all Evolve web conversations, actually all of Evolve offerings, are offered free of charge, but it costs a lot of money to sustain the Evolve project, and we greatly appreciate contributions of any amount. You can donate by clicking the link in the chat or by clicking the donate button in the on the Evolve website. And third, this is all about sacred, respectful conversations. And as a result, Evolve conversations follow four Jewish values. Tselem Elohim, we treat each other as if we are in the image of God. Kavod, we treat each other respectfully. Machloket L'Shem Shamayim, we regard disagreement as for the sake of heaven, that is, producing new Torah. And Redifat Shalom, the pursuit of peace. And now to our guest, Rabbi Bob Gluck. Bob, in addition to being a rabbi, is a pianist, composer, and a writer. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Albany. He is the author of 3 books published by University of Chicago Press. The most recent book just came out a few weeks ago, Mazel Tov. Pat Metheny, Stories Beyond Words. He also has 12 recordings of his music, including Early Morning Star, FMR Records. Bob is a former executive director of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association and former pulpit rabbi. He staffed, among his many accomplishments, the Joint Reconstructionist Commission on Homosexuality, 1990 to 1992, a really groundbreaking enterprise. And he edited the commission's report and the commission's study guide. He also chaired, following that, in the 1993 Kehila Mekabelet Welcoming Communities Task Force of the Federation of Reconstructionist Congregations and Chavurot. And finally, while we'll be focusing primarily and maybe exclusively on his essay, Animal Intelligence, Looking Beyond Chosenness and Speciesism for the Sake of the Planet, we might also refer to his most recent Evolve essay, Jewish Peoplehood Reconsidered, and both of those links are in the chat. Okay, welcome, Bob. How do we get the two of our faces in them? Right, anyway, won't worry about that. I think it would begin to start this conversation for you to give us a bit of a rundown, a basic explanation of why, ever since Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan in the mid-20th century expressed the view, Reconstructionist Jews have rejected the idea that Jews are the chosen people. So just a bit about what were Kaplan's original arguments, how do they play today, what do you think about all that? Because we're going to go to speciesism, that is chosenness for the human species. We might as well start with chosenness for the Jewish people, or lack thereof.
Well, hi, Jacob.
Hi.
Good to see you and welcome everybody. So my understanding of Kaplan is, I think there are really 4 points. One is that Kaplan was a religious naturalist. He didn't believe that um, things happen through supernatural invention and intervention, but rather through the natural order and through history. Um, Therefore, there's no God that is a chooser. There's no God person who says, "I want this one. I want that one." So that's one part. Um, the other second is that sort of following suit is that there's nothing, according to Kaplan, radically different in nature about the Jewish people from other peoples in the sense that peoples evolve through history and through time and events and personalities and cultures evolve. Um, so Jews have a history that can't be explained except through historical development and not through oh, supernatural intervention. Um, Third is that Kaplan felt that moving into the modern world, where unlike the medieval uh, Christian Jewish world, uh, Jews were living in as citizens of nation states and that were founded on principles of equality and democracy. Um, and our equality was a good thing for the Jews, as it was for everybody else, for just the nature of a democratic state, but also it was safer for Jews than anything really in the past. The fourth part is along the lines of the value of equality that Kaplan believed that every culture and every people had inherent value and worth, that each may have particular areas reflected in their cultures that develop in certain kinds of ways, and that Kaplan's kind of, we'll use the word mission, use the word vocation actually for the Jewish people, is not to be special, radically different from others, but rather um, would lead to Jews living fully as Jews, living their lives fully, drawing upon the resources of Jewish life and Jewish community and learning, being committed to living the best lives that they can. And so that would be sort of his idea of vocation, as opposed to uh, specialness, or uniqueness, chosenness.
Okay, thank you. If I may, on that last point, he also believed, I think, that every people or every culture had its own vocation, and its job was to live the best life and develop
Right.
the best values. So we were all in this parallel, which I think is important for what we're going to talk about.
Totally, absolutely, yes.
Okay. Okay. So before we get further, I just really was thrilled by a number of your descriptions of how a bird song, that is, how birds communicate, which I had no idea about. Would you just give us a taste of that without being comprehensive? What you want to?
Well, since we don't have 2 hours worth, 3, 4 hours worth here.
Right.
Well, let me do one other thing first, though, which is just flowing out of the idea of chosenness and rejection of chosenness. Uh, and, I took these in reverse order. I was interested in a concept that a scholar named Jacob van Oeks, who developed in 1909, called the Umwelt. And I think it's actually a very Kaplanian kind of idea, related to, every people has its vocation, but one among many. And Umwelt means the species specific world. And so that's something that we're not aware of. We live in a species-specific world that we think of as sort of like our hand going into a glove that fits really nicely. It's as if the world, the cosmos, was designed for us. Um, there's oxygen in the air. We're bipedal. We're standing. We have opposing thumbs. Um, we have what um, uh, J.J. Gibson referred to as affordances, um, attributes that we can use to our benefit. And so we're not aware of the fact that from our perspective, unconsciously, it looks like we're special because everything works the way we need it to, assuming we don't destroy it within some limitations. And it makes the world fully comprehensible. We can make sense out of this world because it seems to us that it works for us. And what von Uxküll had to say about that was, and that's true for every single species, that every species, including Homo sapiens, inhabit in environments and have attributes of their physical design and capabilities and so on that make everything one of a piece. And that the way in which I come to understand all this is really through the lens of being a musician. And that's how I came to really being interested in the species specific world, the Umwelt of songbirds. And part of my interest was really trying to get a handle on human beings. Like, how are we one among species? We inhabit our own Umwelt. Radically different from others. We don't really recognize theirs as one in which a creature could function. We can't. We're unlike whales. We can't we can't live under the sea. We can't, unlike birds, we can't fly, et cetera, et cetera. But we may get into some more of that. So, so turning to songbirds, I first want to point out that I want to identify two sort of specialty areas. There are ethologists, and they are scholars who study animal behavior. Then there are people referred to as zoomusicologists, and they are people who study musical practices, sound and culture, and so on, but do so within the realms of animal species rather than human cultures. The term songbird is used by ethologists to refer to all kinds of birds that chirp and call and signal, and then others who have this whole other thing going, and it's those 10% of birds that really fascinate me and really are at the center of what I wrote about. And so those songbirds are, well, Ocene passerine. So the passerine is from passeriformes, perching birds. So they're birds that have 4 toes that can wrap around a branch of a tree so they can perch. And that's a position from which they can sing. Within the passerine are Ocene passerine, and Ocenes have like these very flexible vocal capabilities, very highly skilled muscle control, except that they have a syrinx rather than what we have as human beings, which has 2 chambers. They can breathe and sing at the same time. They can switch from one to the other while flying. But it's that kind of skilled control of what for humans would be vocal muscles. One interesting thing about those 10% of all birds that have this combo set of capabilities, sort of the founder of zoomusicology, Francois Bernard Mache, uh, pointed out that, you know, if you think about the percentage of human beings who are professional musicians, and consider that 10% of birds have these specialized capabilities, that's 50 to 100 times the percentage of skilled human musicians there are in the general population. So a small percentage, but tremendous in number. So some of the interesting things about these kind of specialized songbirds, the one that I'll refer to generically as songbirds, is that they can sing discrete pitches like human beings can, particular notes, notes between notes, microtones. They can create all different kinds of sounds, some which sound like the bird song kinds of sounds we're used to, and they differ from species to species. Others imitate, machines, collect sounds from around their environments. And what many of these songbirds do, which is so fascinating and so seemingly human, but completely unrelated to human beings, but we as humans can experience them, hear them as if they are human-like, are that some songbird species learn their material. Once they leave the nest, they will, as it were, be mentored by mature birds who will teach them collections of little melodic snippets. And what they'll learn to do over time is do this very composer-like kind of thing, which is, I guess in computerese, we'd say cut and paste. So take little motifs, these little melody snippets, and repeat it, and then grab from snippet B from the collection, and then move on to C, and then repeat C 4 times, jump back to A, and form these structures. When human beings form structures, we call them composers. So there's this sense of structure. There's a sense of seemingly having what you might refer to as a musical mind, this capability of learning material, remembering it, storing it, calling upon what is stored, learn new things from other sounds in some cases, and then draw upon this vocabulary to generate, for some songbirds, 15 minutes, hours and hours of songs, maybe interrupted by pauses. For some birds as solo song, for many as duets and ensemble songs. And what else can I add? That relational quality. So songbirds don't sing in the shower, so to speak. They're always singing to other birds. Now, ethologists will tell you that, well, that is a component of mating behaviors. That is a component of territorial protection, of scaring away predators, of functionality. But I think it's important to not get too caught up in the functionality, because, we can talk about human musicians, like in the 1940s and 50s, of jazz musicians having these cutting contests where they're sort of trying to out solo each other, or think about dancers on a dance floor who are flirting through their dancing. There's a lot of human musical and dance behavior that you could describe completely in functional terms and non-expressive terms, just like some scientists describe bird and other animal vocal and other sonic kinds of expressive behavior. And one can talk about in terms of aesthetics as well, which is a human word to use for that. Um, so what this seems to enter kind of the aesthetic realm, meaning something beyond functional, something that involves an appreciation of the complexity, of the depth, of of communication beyond for humans language between literal, stay away predator. Um, and some of the examples that I find are songbirds that best example is the pied butcherbird. Hollis Taylor is the main scholar of the pied butcherbird. Um, and she'll point out that in their solo song, often they'll have these extravagant, over the top kinds of vocal displays as if we're sort of on the stage of an opera house. Like, is this simple mating behavior? Well, there are species where a male bird will audition sort of favorite fancy licks for a female bird, and we'll see what takes. Um, and the female bird will indicate, yeah, I like that one, do that one. Oh no, don't do that one, do more of this one. And there'll be sometimes mating behavior that has this kind of aesthetic dimension to it. Why does that female bird like that particular song so much this particular day in this, I don't know, this weather, this environment, this particular tree, this particular who knows what exactly. But this means something so much more in this moment. Why could that be? Well, for human beings, we say, well, there's an aesthetic dimension to that. For human beings, we say, well, it makes us feel good. Uh, it excites us. It intrigues us. We want to hear it again. And so on along those lines. I could talk about form, but I think that's getting too much into the woods. Um, yeah, one other thing I want to add about form, though, actually, is I mentioned cutting and pasting. There are these additive forms where there are songbirds that'll have like a little motif, a little snippet of a melody, and they won't only cut and paste different little motifs, but they'll slice and dice an individual motif. And let's say there are like four sounds in a sequence, da 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 da, human melody, and they'll just slice out one or two notes. They'll repeat them. They'll go back to the whole thing. They'll pull out one. They'll repeat cycles. Um, they'll delete some, and you won't hear it again, maybe for a while or ever again during that period of song singing. Um, it's just really, really fascinating. I think I'll stop there about uh, answer that question about sort of specialty musicianship amongst songbirds.
So just that was just fantastic. Listen to you all day. It's unbelievable. I wouldn't think that I could. Yeah. Um, the
Well, I'm performing for you so that you'll like what I say and want to hear more.
slice and dice.
Just like
And
Pied
so just to make things very obvious, as you describe in your piece, what you're describing does not fit the approach that most musicians are educated in with regard to regarding non-human song, right? That so what you're talking about is something more like what we think of as song, but I mean not exactly. You get is that enough of a prompt? what
Sure, that's a good enough prompt.
what's the traditional way of talking, the outmoded, incorrect way of talking about this that I would have had a month ago? That well, I mean, you just oh, if I could just listen closely enough, I could hear the exact same pattern, right? Um,
So first, I'd say in the most general sense that along the lines of chosenness and umwelt and applying some of that to human musics, making that a plural. And there are musician scholars who use the word musicking to describe music making in a broad kind of way. So first off, to generalize in any way about human musical expression is going to be inherently wrong. That every culture, every human culture has different kinds of sounds they hear as musical, different functions of music, different settings for music. Now, the notion of performance and the way that Western cultures um, see as one of the normative ways that people would or should experience music, it was very specific to, you know, coming out of the Renaissance and into early modern European culture, where there'd be specialists who are performing music that a composer who is not necessarily or probably not one of the performers has dreamt up, developed, written down, and now is being performed, and everybody else in the room is part of an audience. So, even if you think about sort of Jewish pre-modern cultures, um, if you think about even like an Orthodox synagogue now, um, or a Black Baptist church, um, there's no really clear division between frontal presentation and an audience or participant. Everybody's a participant. They're all in the game. So that's one thing to say. Uh, the sounds of Balinese gamelan in its highly structured kind of way. Well, the musical instruments, um, Chopin would have scratched his head out and said, "That's not musical. Where are the violins? Where's the string section? Where's the piano? Um, why is it structured in such a formalized, repetitive kind of way? Uh, why is so much Jewish prayer responsorial? Um, um, kind of, uh, one line and then a response line. Why are Black churches like that? Why is early church chant like that? Why aren't there just performers sort of just playing their Beethoven sonatas so we can listen to it? Why aren't performers just not people who study the technique of their instrument and learn how to memorize and to some degree interpret something somebody else has um, composed? European culture had evolved as a non-improvisational culture. Many musical cultures are improvisational. DJ cultures are improvisational. Jazz cultures are lean towards improvisational since World War II. So, just in terms of my own story, I grew up as an improviser. Um, And my parents decided what many Jewish parents, but I guess out of um, in the generation of the first half of the 20th century, what parents do when their children look like they have some kind of musical talent is send them to a specialist to acculturate them as to music making. Um, so I was assigned a teacher. And he wasn't interested in my improvising, although I was very excited about it. He thought that a lot of what I was doing sounded like what he thought of as noise. Um, I was playing along to my brother's crying and screaming as a young child. That was really what I was doing. I was doing the family soundtrack. And to me, it was musical, and I started writing it down when I learned to notate music. After a few months, my teacher decided that I should go to a conservatory program. And so I ended up going to Juilliard School of Music. Then was called the preparatory division, now called pre-college. For me, it was 1 day a week. Um, I had the choice after a little while to go to a 3 day a week thing. I was already going to Hebrew school 3 days a week. A music teacher, piano teacher felt like it wasn't a great way to grow up. If I want to become a musician, I don't need to be doing that as an adolescent and teenager. So I went once a week. But there's a famous story that Miles Davis wrote in his autobiography. And I would have said it was apocryphal, except I had my own version of it 20 years later. So Miles Davis put up his hand in Juilliard music history class and asked the question, what about the blues? And the teacher said, oh, the blues. Well, those are sad, those are folk melodies for sad people in the hands of composers can be turned into music. Skip ahead 20 years, put up my hand in music theory class. I think I was in third grade, and said, what about Jewish cantorial music? And my theory teacher said, you can probably fill in the blanks right now. Oh, those are, you know, primitive folk melodies in the hands of a composer. They can be turned into music. That was the music world I was raised in. Tons of technique, limited amounts of expression, no improvisation. And it was as if, despite the fact I spent a good 2 hours a day, I went to Hebrew school 3 days a week, as I said. I spent 2 hours a day out in the fields playing stickball or baseball, hardball on a cement playground in Queens. Um, and I was playing the piano 2 hours a day because I had to practice. This is from like third grade on. Uh, and I practiced my Bach, Beethoven, Schubert, Schumann. I didn't even know until many years later that my teacher was actually a specialist in modern Mexican music from the 20s and 30s, where she spent a lot of time in Cuernavaca, hanging out with Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, and it was a whole world I didn't know about. But so, despite the fact that I lived in this broad world of Hebrew school and sports, we were in the center of the civil rights movement. I was exposed to many forms of cultural expression, but I lived in a musical bubble that was based on the idea that music was defined by what I was learning at Juilliard. And so it was like I had blinders of a kind on. So the idea that anything that was outside of that little narrow slice could be thought of as musical was, did the trial balloon. I took in from Hebrew school, you know, synagogue chant, and that got shot down. And, I learned really fast. I have come a very, very long way. Um, in 10th grade, I heard Jimi Hendrix, um, and I learned two things. One was, as I see it, he sort of like walked, so to speak, metaphorically, this like tightrope between pitch sounds and feedback noise sounds. And he'll go back and back and forth between pitch and distortion. And I got the idea that musical sound wasn't necessarily pitched, that there were other kinds of sounds. I mentioned the Pied Butcherbird, imitating machines. Well, there's Jimi Hendrix using modern technology of the 1960s, kind of like, interpreting the sounds of the world of that era. And second, you know, I noticed, well, the music he was playing and that I started playing was fun. And I wasn't having fun at Juilliard. It was actually a mean place. Um, and so I left there, joined a rock band, um, and later on, uh, you know, learned about improvisation, was exposed to all sorts of black music. Um, and my musical world since then has been very much, the improvisatory world of jazz, the sonic world of noise and sound that I learned in Hendrix. That's a world of early electronic music of the 1950s and 60s and 70s. So it was no stretch for a fellow musician to say, hey, look, there's something human-like about the pitch organization, motivic organization of certain kinds of songbirds. Why don't you pay attention to that? That seems very musical from a human perspective. And I've subsequently gone further and thought, well, there's something very human musical about that because we like to anthropomorphize things, but it's utterly foreign beyond that. Oh, it reflects a world that we cannot know because we cannot step into the umwelt of songbirds. So it's both that familiarity and that radical otherness um, that I find so fascinating. And that's sort of in a nutshell my own adventure. Actually, last piece, I just finished this book about a guitarist composer, Pat Metheny, and he's one of a tradition within jazz performance that relies a lot on developing little motifs, like selecting motifs, little melodic snippets, and then developing and letting them unfold. And a lot of his improvisational work is very much about like having his two motifs, developing them, not like songbirds, they're not cut and paste, but in a way that sort of unfolds narrative like, again, using the word as a narrative as a metaphor, meaning that it takes you somewhere, meaning you start somewhere. It's like seeing a movie. There's a storyline, you go somewhere, there are points of tension and repose, and then it brings you back down. And for Matheny, it could be a long phrase, it could be a whole solo, but it could be constructed of motifs. And when I sort of put that together, I was thinking, well, I'm really not, these two topics are not radically different in a way, although Matheny's motivic development and uh, songbird motivic usage and cutting and pasting and construction and formalization are seemingly coming out of different places from different, you know, we evolved completely separate from songbirds. We've been doing our musical thing for tens of thousands of years. Songbirds have probably been doing it for tens of millions of years. We don't know. Anyway,
Okay. Two questions from the chat. First one is a request for links to recordings of the Songbird songs. Can we promise them in a mailing afterwards to registrants? Is that something that is possible?
yes.
Okay, good answer. Um, then Peter Shubin asks, how do we know that the songbird musical behavior is learned versus innate?
Well, there are songbirds that we can tell that it's innate because like they pop out and they it's all in place pretty early on. It doesn't change, doesn't have the formal structures. It's predictable. Uh, you can observe songbirds learning from their mentor birds. You can watch it.
Mentor bird, you said, is that right? Like
That's
a,
my own little expression.
yeah. Okay. Um, Peter, you can ask a follow-up question if that wasn't. um, but I want to move to, all right, what's so special about birds? I guess that is, I know that my dogs, my beloved dogs, react, respond, learn, express themselves in different ways. But it seems like you're making a case or have an intuition that the behavior of birds somehow vaults us into a more radically non-anthropomorphic universe where we really get to multiple umwelts.
Yes. So, and I would say uh, humpback whales are another species that one could discuss in parallel as having uh, distinct qualities of highly elaborate, very complex, constructed songs. Um, there are scholars who applied some of the terminology developed for songbirds to apply to whales. Um, I think, and there are human beings who engage with whales and their songs, um, and the way they do that is by using hydrophones. Um, Sound travels much faster under the water than it does through the air, but you can't hear it above water. And you can't really hear what's above water, below water. Um, but a hydrophone is sort of like kind of like a sound system by which you can sort of project sound from, you know, so David Rothenberg plays his clarinet using a hydrophone. Those sounds can be projected through into the sea, and he experiences um, some levels of response. Paul Winter, a saxophonist, refers to what he does with whales as communing rather than communication. Anyway, so there's at least one other species that seems radically different. So one of my favorite blog posts of all the ones I've written over the last few years, which is, by the way, bobbook.com, it's my book blog, was what I learned from walking my dog Max, uh, of blessed memory. And Max, it wasn't about sounds at all. It was about who was leading and who was following. And so he would tug, and I'd have to catch up. I'd let him off leash. He'd run ahead. He'd wait for me. There was this kind of call and response, this kind of the level of interaction that went on, and this is the kind of language I use to describe musical performance practices and musical behaviors. When I'm playing with my fellow jazz musicians, we're responding to each other in the moment, but also um, um, listening to things one plays, and then somehow, um, you know, one person's solo then is responded by another solo, or one person's gesture at one moment is responded by another. It's not completely unlike what I experienced with Max. So I think that your dog makes sounds that are expressive. Yes, right. In some ways, you can tell what they are. You know that your dog is letting you know that there's somebody at the door. The dog lets you know when they are hungry, um, frustrated, need to go for a walk. A lot of what one experiences with your dog is more in that category. Um, Emily Doolittle, who is a Zoom musicologist and composer uh, in Scotland, um, she recently was talking a bit about. Actually, she uploaded some videos of her kind of calling and responding with her dog. So there was something going on there. I'm not sure what it was. She's not sure what it was. But I think of it as very different than this kind of seemingly highly formalized, highly organized, well beyond any kind of simple signaling, um, communicating needs, expressing fears, but just a level of complexity and depth and seeming expressive behavior that's, just the over the topness, and uh, less predictability. Many songbirds will cut and paste the same material in completely different ways. Like an endless stream, continually generating the material. Um, Humpback whales don't do that, but they seem to discard one song that's adopted by all of their species across hundreds and hundreds of miles until it starts to morph, and then they replace it with something else. And that's wild. They're solo singers, but seem to communicate, but like have their annual top hit or only hit. Like it's a top one. Very different than your dog. I don't know if that answers your question though. What am I missing?
So complexity,
Hmm.
um, depth. They're not just dumb birds chirping, right? They're also communicating with each other, which we don't see so much, I guess, with dogs.
Well, I don't think that the ones that are chirping are dumb either. I mean, because they're musical minds that are that I don't think your
No,
dog's dumb either. But in terms of there's a musical mind involved in to some degree, but in a way that we can recognize as a musical mind because it seems to be choice making that gets involved. Choices on the basis of what? We don't know. Um, but then again, there are patterns that we find also that within Songbird and um, that human beings do. And I think there's some scientists who say um, that call and response um, kinds of behaviors, which may be very, very ancient for human beings, may have been learned from animals. I don't know. Um, seem to reflect maybe a symmetry that's inherent in the universe as we know it. We find it all over the place. Different forms of symmetry and the call and response. When we recite Psalms, one phrase followed by the first half of a phrase, followed by its antecedent, which repeats the meaning of the first, but in a slightly different way, or synagogue chants where there's a phrase and then a response and then a refrain and then a response and then a refrain. Um, those are all these symmetrical um, kinds of of vocal behaviors and musical structures. We find them in birds, but we find them in other aspects of nature. I
okay.
don't think we see a lot of that in in your dog, although your dog is very symmetrical. Symmetrical, two ears, two pairs of legs.
Okay. I want to get to some questions here. Steve, no, Daniel Oppenheim. So, if some bird species learn from its mentor, that would imply that there would be some musical compositional differences in songs of the same species in different geographies, right? Wrong?
Well, certain songbirds only inhabit specific um, um, locales, and their behaviors, musical and otherwise, are not separable from the environments that they inhabit, such as songbirds can develop certain kinds of songs because they're in an environment where sound can travel a long distance. Um, where it's not impeded by other things. So different songbird species will have different kinds of songs in different places. So there's that. Um, but even within, a similar locale, um, different species can have very different songs, um, which remain largely intact, except in some cases, like pied butcherbirds that may borrow snippets from some other species. But again, like there are species, like that pied butcherbird that are, and many others that are continually generating new versions and new concatenations and cut and pastes and deletions and additions. So the formal structures are changing. There's some songbirds that actually have more formal structures, like an introduction and then unfolding and then like codas. Uh, um, so two birds of the same species can be similar material but very different kind of song. It's theirs. Some can have very much similar, very much the same. I am not a zoommusicologist or an ethologist. I'm a musician, and I think everything for me flows out of being a musician and a listener and a learner from scholars. There's tremendous amount of literature about all this, and I think I'm still working on a book project that's putting a lot of this together.
So Lisa asks, how do you view the implications of not assuming that humans are the chosen species, assuming that we are all in our own umwelts or welts or whatever? Um, uh, where do you take that? You become a vegan? Do you have different attitude towards the extinction of all of species? Just let me just leave it open.
Well, I'm sure. Well, I'm marking my 50th anniversary of being a vegetarian, most of which were as a vegan. So, so that's not a new move for me. But yeah, all of the above. I think that once any individual nation or people decides that it isn't the most special, most important, and therefore loses its interest in annihilating every other competitor, um, we inhabit a different kind of a world. We were in that world during World War II almost. I'd say really broadly, I think it really calls upon us to have a radical change in sensibility. Kaplan would have called it a Copernican revolution. Um, it's I remember there was a certain candidate for the presidency. He ran against Barack Obama, uh, who said he was self-made, which implied that he built the roads that led up to his house. He built all the infrastructure. He invented the plumbing devices in his house. Um, None of us are. We all inhabit our environment. We all are creatures of our environment. We're integrally connected to our own environment, as are every other species. And so one thing is that when we interfere with the intact qualities of another species umwelt, we are destroying that species. We don't have to like kill animals one by one to annihilate their species. We just have to damage the integrity of their umwelt. Now, we need to recognize that they have an umwelt. There are multiple umwelts. Every plant has its umwelt. Every creature, every bacteria has its umwelt. I don't want to carry it too far. I don't think that Vaccinations are bad, that one shouldn't take antibiotics. I'm not suggesting that bacteria and human beings should have equal standing. I'm not even getting into a question about uh, animal rights. I'm just suggesting that that's a conversation that can be opened from a perspective for me as a musician, but the perspective of if we aren't the most important species, if it isn't all about us, if it's not all there to serve us, then we live in a very different world than we thought we did before thinking about that. And this is a very difficult thing for people to do. Um, we are a very self-focused species. But, I think that, you know, I believe that xenophobes can believe that people, unlike however they understand themselves, can learn empathy. Um, I think I take that on faith that that's a possibility. That's an extreme example, although it's current. But I think it's all part of a continuum where I think that I know we who are decent human beings who do our best to be empathetic to those close and less close to our immediate family members, those close and less close to the cultures we inhabit, the nations we inhabit, um, can extend that beyond our species. So that's really the overarching teaching, I think that um, I think this leads to, and what I suggest as a musician is that music is one way in, and using music, the nature of songbird expression is one way to sort of get inside the notion that here's a species that inhabits an Unbelt with its integrity, and look what it does that even we human beings, so radically different from songbirds, can see as structured in ways that seem familiar and some sounds that seem familiar.
Yeah, beautiful. That is a nice place, a wonderful place to wrap this up. Um, Thank you for your question, Lisa. It evoked what we needed to elicit. Uh, Pamela Faith Lerman, who had to go to work now, says, thank you, Rabbis Bob and Jacob. I want to include that. So thank you, Rabbi Bob. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you all for participating and being with us here. Bob has another couple of essays on the way, one about whales, by the way. And just track him on Evolve because he's
Right there's the Peoplehood article I can mention that's already up there.
yeah, right. There is. I meant on this topic.
Oh yes. Okay.
The next article I want to have you write is, if you want, is what is this? The implications beyond earthly species, right? If if uh, if not even what medievals called the sublunar world, the world of the Earth, isn't we shouldn't be regarded as chosen or special. How does that help us to reflect on the universe as a whole? But that's for another hour.
Well, let me give you one sentence on that, which is that one response to the search for life, extraterrestrial life, is pause that for a moment and look for terrestrial life that you're not familiar with and what it sounds like. That will keep you really, really busy. But interesting point. Good question.
Okay, very good. Okay, we have thank yous. You can look in the chat. And thank you all. Have a great day. Take care.